Hey guys, tonight we wander into the misty fields of Edwardian England, where the first rays of dawn spill like molten gold across plowed earth. You trudge along fur slick with dew, your boots sucking slightly in the damp soil, and for a moment you feel the world is nothing but mud, sweat, and the low hum of birds waking. You probably won't survive this, well, at least not without a stiff back, a few sore fingers, and a very strong cup of tea. But that's part of the charm, isn't it? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while we're at it, drop your location and the local time. Let's see if anyone else is trudging through fields at this hour. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin with a breath of the crisp morning air that carries a scent somewhere between damp hay and rich, tilled soil. Tiny droplets bead on every blade of grass, glittering like scattered jewels under the emerging sunlight. A thin fog curls around hedgerows, hiding the cottages in a silvery haze. You can hear the faintest scrape of a wooden plow in the distance. Ah, someone is already at work, probably cursed by the same sky that you're marveling at. You step carefully into a furrow, noting the give of the soil beneath your boots. Historians still argue whether early Edwardian plowing methods were more about efficiency or tradition, but standing here, you almost feel the rhythm embedded in centuries of labor. A crow caws from the nearest tree, ruffling the air with an almost comical authority, and you think about how in these fields, even wildlife seems complicit in the daily grind. The crops haven't yet been planted, but you can imagine the cycle: wheat, barley, oats, each chosen for a reason lost to the endless turns of the seasons. Fringe historians suggest that some farmers used little charms or whispered incantations over each seed, convinced that luck could nudge the earth toward fertility. You smirk at the image of a farmer mumbling to his barley, though maybe it was that different from muttering complaints at a stubborn lawn mower in your own backyard. The manor house looms faintly beyond the hedgerow, its stone silhouette barely visible through the morning mist. Manor lords and their appointed stewards hold sway over these fields, ensuring that fealty and rent are collected with the precision of a well-oiled machine. You feel the invisible threads tying laborers to obligations. If you've ever had a boss who watches too closely, you get the idea. Yet there's humor here too. Stories persist of lords who couldn't tell a turnip from a rutabaga, while peasants quietly chuckled behind barn doors. These social structures seem rigid, but for you, walking among the dewy furrows, they feel like something lived, breathed, and occasionally grumbled at. As you step closer to the edge of the plowed land, the subtle noises of the countryside grow. A dog barking in the distance, the soft swish of grass, the rhythmic thump of a cart wheel over a rutted path. You pause to notice the oddities: the crooked fence leaning like a tipsy sentry, the scarecrow with a hat too large for its wooden head, and the occasional glimmer of sunlight reflecting off a small puddle. One quirky fact: some farmers believed that stepping over the same puddle 3 times in succession could confuse evil spirits, though no one really remembers who invented this tradition. You chuckle, thinking how, despite the centuries, humans and their superstitions remain delightfully unchanged. By now, your fingers are tingling from the cool air, and the first hint of toil starts to creep into your consciousness. You glance back at the manor, imagining a steward already counting the rows, wondering if they're perfect, and realizing that your own journey today is part of a cycle as old as the fields themselves. You trudge onward, boots sinking slightly with each step, and can almost hear the echoes of past generations. Laughter, complaints, the occasional misstep of a plowshare cutting too deep. You pause, breathing it all in: the smell of rich soil, the gentle hum of the awakening countryside, and the strange serenity that only comes from stepping fully into someone else's world, centuries removed. It's the start of the day, yes, but more than that, it's the start of understanding. That life here was a dance of effort and patience, humor and hierarchy, magic and method. You brush a strand of hair from your face and glance down at the plowed earth once more. Each furrow is a line of history, waiting for you to walk it, to feel it, to somehow connect with the rhythm of a past life that insists on being remembered, even in a single morning's mist. The manor rises slowly into view as you trudge across the dew-laden fields, a silent sentinel of authority, its stone walls catching the weak glow of the morning sun. You probably won't survive a full day under its watchful eyes without tripping over a cobblestone or two, but somehow that looming presence feels less threatening than it should, more like an overgrown, grumpy neighbor peering at the work happening below. Manor lords and their stewards are the heartbeat of these lands, orchestrating labor with precision, though sometimes clumsily. Their influence threads invisibly through every furrow and pasture, binding peasants and tenant farmers into a web of obligation and unspoken rules. You notice the subtle signs: a wagon strategically parked to monitor the plowing, a dog that seems far too well fed and alert, the smell of baked bread wafting from a distant kitchen that signals the steward's readiness to observe. The lord of the manor is a peculiar mix of privilege and performative responsibility. You imagine him striding across his lawns, cloak sweeping behind him, inspecting barley and wheat as if he could grow the crops with sheer willpower. Historians still argue whether Edwardian lords truly understood the labor they oversaw, or whether their authority was purely ceremonial, an inherited performance designed to maintain order and control. You lean on a hedge post, squinting at the figures working the distant fields, trying to guess which of them is the steward. The one with a whip curled over his arm, perhaps, or maybe the man shouting numbers and measuring cords of straw. Every command, every nod, every hand gesture is an exercise in subtle domination. The entire system, though rigid, hums with a strange, almost imperceptible rhythm that keeps the countryside in balance. Your boots sink slightly into the softened earth as you cross a narrow track, a cart rut that seems centuries old. Alongside it, women carry baskets of vegetables and bundles of firewood, their movements fluid, familiar, yet sharply aware of the lordly gaze. In Edwardian villages, women are both the backbone and the hidden engine of productivity, taking care of home, livestock, and seasonal tasks while maintaining a careful awareness of social hierarchy. You notice how they move, a brisk step here, a careful glance there, communicating silently with neighbors and the landscape alike. Some fringe accounts even suggest that certain women perform little protective rites over the livestock, whispering tiny charms to keep misfortune at bay, though the scholarly consensus is murky at best. Regardless, their labor is both visible and invisible, tangible in the produce and clean cottages, but largely ignored in the official records. The lords themselves have quirks, little eccentricities that echo through the fields. Some insist on personally inspecting the harvest, touching the heads of grain as if their fingertips could detect imperfection. Others are known for peculiar diets, like a fondness for a particular type of pea, or the insistence on a rare cheese imported from a neighboring shire, which leads to gossip among the villagers that borders on reverence and ridicule in equal measure. You notice the subtle interplay. Peasants humor the lord's whims, but do so with barely concealed amusement, swapping stories in hushed tones while the overseer's back is turned. This human comedy, played out across furrows and courtyards, is as vital as any plow or scythe. You wander closer to the livestock pens, where the smell of straw, dung, and hay blends into a pungent perfume only a seasoned field traveler could appreciate. The manor's influence is evident here too. Cattle are carefully counted and registered, sheep are shorn on schedule, and pigs are fed in precise portions. These routines are not merely practical, they serve as subtle assertions of control. Even a stray cow wandering too close to the wrong field could trigger an immediate reprimand. You watch a young boy guiding a stubborn ox, his small hands wrapped around the rope, and think about how responsibility and obedience are instilled from childhood. In fact, children here are apprentices not just in craft but in the social structure itself, learning the rhythm of fealty almost as a second language. The kitchen gardens near the manor are a microcosm of order imposed on nature. You smell herbs, sage, thyme, and rosemary mingling with the rich aroma of fresh soil. A gardener, probably under the lord's employ, carefully prunes and tends, moving with a precision that suggests a lifetime of repetition. There's a quirky fact you notice immediately. Some gardeners claim that whispering to tomatoes encourages them to grow, a practice historians still debate. You shrug, imagining a tomato blushing under such attention, and move along, your fingers brushing against nettles and sun-warmed stone. The lord's influence is less visible here, but no less present. Even plants feel the weight of human hierarchy, curated for productivity and aesthetic approval alike. As you continue, you notice the invisible hierarchy in the field itself. The best land, rich, fertile, well-irrigated, belongs to the lord or to tenants of higher status, while the less desirable plots, prone to flooding or poor soil, are worked by those with fewer rights or weaker claims. It's subtle but relentless, and you can feel it underfoot. The tilt of the field, the difference in soil texture, the occasional patch of stubborn weeds. Social stratification is encoded into the very land, and stepping from one section to another feels like crossing boundaries invisible to anyone who isn't paying attention. You can't help but smirk at the thought that centuries later, agronomists would call it microterrain advantage, while villagers called it the Lord's favor. Though the result is the same, some soil yields better bread than others. The laborers themselves are a study in resilience and subtle resistance. You watch as a man hoists a sack of grain onto his shoulder, adjusting his hat to keep sweat from dripping into his eyes. A woman untangles a mess of twine, her fingers nimble and sure, eyes flicking toward the manor as if to anticipate the next command. You know how they communicate with gestures, whistles, and half-whispered words, a language born of necessity and caution. There's humor here too, a boy pretending to trip over a hidden root, earning a stifled chuckle from his sister while the overseer turns away. Life under fealty is strict, yes, but it is also punctuated by these tiny, human rebellions, moments of levity that historians still argue reveal the hidden culture of rural Edwardian society. You cross a small stream, its water clear and cold, imagining centuries of farmers using it for irrigation, washing tools, and quenching their own thirst. There's ingenuity here that goes unnoticed until you pause. Simple sluices redirect water, earthen dams control flow, and stones placed just right prevent erosion. Some accounts suggest farmers even employed early hydraulic trickery, building miniature dams that could double irrigation efficiency, though evidence is scarce and historians debate the plausibility. You grin, picturing a field transformed into a small, controlled river system, complete with mischievous ducks and occasional complaints from the Lord about flooded furrows. Near the edge of the manor's grounds, you spot a few oddities. A scarecrow with a face made from an old boot, a twisted tree branch adorned with ribbons, and a patch of wildflowers deliberately left untended. These quirks are reminders that human creativity seeps into every crevice, even under strict oversight. You pause, noting the tension between obedience and imagination. Some of these practices have roots in superstition, protecting crops from witches, bad weather, or jealous neighbors, while others are purely aesthetic. The blend of practicality, magic, and humor is pervasive, a quiet rebellion woven into the everyday rhythm of rural life. As the day warms, villagers begin to gather in clusters, exchanging gossip, barter tips, and advice on crop rotation. The manor's influence is still present. Conversations occasionally pause at the sight of a passing steward, but these small communities maintain autonomy in subtle ways. You notice the interplay of authority and social cohesion. The lord claims control, but the villagers negotiate daily freedoms, from shared water access to communal hay storage. It's a delicate balance, one that requires both vigilance and cunning. Even your own steps, careful as you are, seem to participate in this dance, respecting invisible boundaries while witnessing human ingenuity in motion. By late morning, the rhythm of labor and hierarchy is fully apparent. You watch a man sharpen his scythe, a ritual as precise as any courtly procedure, while a woman leads a cart loaded with firewood along the rutted path. You pause to note the subtleties, the tone of a call, the tilt of a head, the way oxen respond to touch and voice. There's history in every gesture, and even the smallest action echoes traditions that stretch back generations. Fringe scholars suggest that some gestures were encoded with secret meanings. A nod here, a whistle there, allowing villagers to communicate warnings or humor under the Lord's nose. Whether this is true or not, it adds a layer of depth to the simple act of walking through a field, reminding you that these lands are alive with human intent. Finally, you stand at the crest of a small hill, looking back at the manor and the fields below. The patchwork of labor, soil, water, and architecture forms a living tapestry, rich with both overt control and subtle defiance. You feel the weight of centuries in your boots, the faint pulse of tradition beneath the soil, and a quiet respect for the people whose lives were inseparable from these rhythms. The manor may dictate the rules, but it cannot dictate the small rebellions, the humor, or the enduring human ingenuity that thrives in the spaces between furrows. And in that, you sense a lesson that persists across time. Even under strict hierarchy, life finds a way to be human. You bend low to examine the tools scattered across the edge of the field, their wooden handles warm from the sun, iron edges mottled with rust and hardened soil. The plows, scythes, sickles, and hoes are extensions of the farmers' very bodies, and touching them, you feel a strange connection to the hands that grip them before you. You probably won't survive a day with these implements without blistered palms and aching shoulders, but there's a satisfaction in understanding them. How a well-balanced plow could carve straight furrows, or how a scythe, sharpened correctly, could reduce a morning's backbreaking work to a graceful, almost dance-like motion. Historians still argue whether Edwardian peasants relied more on brute strength or clever mechanics, but standing here, watching the careful angles and adjustments, you suspect it was a precise mix of both. The plow is a marvel of ingenuity disguised as a humble implement. Its curved iron share glints in the light, a simple wedge designed to slice through dense soil. The wooden beams creak under pressure as you lift it, imagining the oxen straining against the harness while the farmer guides the whole apparatus with rhythmic tugs. Fringe accounts claim some plows were even personalized, carved with symbols or initials to bring luck to the land. You can't help but chuckle at the thought of a farmer whispering encouragement to a plow as if it were a stubborn mule. Yet, in the Edwardian countryside, these quirks were not merely superstition. They were a subtle acknowledgement of the farmer's intimate relationship with his tools. Scythes are another story entirely. Leaning against a fence, their long blades curve with lethal elegance. You lift one, feeling the tension in the handle, and marvel at the precision required to swing it efficiently. A poorly timed cut could send the blade skimming harmlessly over the grass or worse, nick your own boots. Some marginally credible accounts even suggest that scythe techniques were passed down with secret family styles, variations that could identify a farmer from miles away based on how the crop fell. Historians still debate whether these distinctions were functional or merely a point of pride, but watching the pattern of grass cut neatly in arcs, you begin to suspect there's truth in both interpretations. Then there are the sickles, smaller handheld versions of the scythe, perfect for intricate work or harvesting in tight rows. You hold one, feeling the weight of history in the iron, and imagine women and children wielding these for hours under the low sun, rhythmically cutting stalks while singing or chanting. Fringe reports even claim that some farmers would etch small runes into the handles, a tiny superstition for bountiful harvests. You grin, picturing a child carefully wielding a rune-covered sickle, probably thinking more about the swaying stalks than mystical protection, yet participating in a tradition older than the manor itself. Hoes are another critical tool, simpler in design yet equally indispensable. You drag one across the soil, nodding the satisfaction of loosening compacted dirt, turning clods into friable earth ready to receive seed. Every strike requires careful alignment, and every movement is a negotiation between strength and rhythm. Oddly, some fringe sources suggest that particular patterns of hoeing, circular, zigzag, or straight, were believed to influence crop growth, a practice that historians still debate for lack of definitive evidence. As you move the tool through the earth, you almost hear the ghosts of past farmers whispering advice or teasing about the proper angle of attack. Knives and small hand tools rest nearby as well. Essential for pruning, weeding, or preparing seeds, these implements reflect another layer of domestic ingenuity. You pick up a curved knife and admire its compact design. Fringe reports note that some Edwardian farmers carried miniature versions tucked into belts or boots, just in case a sudden harvest opportunity appeared. It seems delightfully excessive, but practicality and preparedness were inseparable in a life dictated by soil and season. You run a finger along the handle, worn smooth by decades of use, and feel the echoes of countless hands performing the same motion in countless mornings and evenings. You shift your attention to the harnesses and yokes lying nearby, essential for oxen and horses tasked with pulling plows or carts. Leather straps padded with moss or straw show meticulous craftsmanship. Poor harness could cripple an ox, ruin a plowing session, or provoke the wrath of the manor steward. You pause to admire the ingenuity. Buckles designed for easy adjustment, knots tied for maximum strength, and clever padding to reduce friction. Fringe accounts mention that some harnesses were adorned with small charms, tiny bells, carved symbols, or colorful threads, to keep animals alert or ward off bad luck. And while historians debate the practical versus symbolic significance, standing here, it's easy to imagine the clang of a bell echoing through the misty morning. As you circle the tool area, you notice the layering of experience in every implement. Handles are worn to the precise shape of the hand that gripped them, blades are nicked in ways that tell stories of stubborn roots, and edges glint in the sunlight like small, understated trophies. These are not merely objects, they are extensions of the farmer's body and mind. The act of working the land is inseparable from the act of mastering the tools, and the two combine into a rhythm that outsiders, like you, can almost feel in the air. You lift a plowshare once more, listening to the faint creak of metal and wood, and you understand the intimacy, almost sensual, between human and tool. You wander over to the shed, where spare tools hang neatly along the walls. There's a quirk here you can't ignore. A small, crooked hammer with a note carved into the handle, probably a joke or a mark of ownership, something personal in a world dominated by hierarchy and obligation. Historians still argue whether such idiosyncrasies were common or rare, but you appreciate the human touch in the otherwise utilitarian setup. Even in the rigid structure of Edwardian agriculture, there's room for personality, humor, and a small rebellion against monotony. A few carts are parked nearby, wooden wheels thick with mud and wear. You touch the spokes, imagining the creak of each rotation as a man or woman pulls a load across rutted fields. Fringe accounts suggest that farmers sometimes greased axles with animal fat or even beer to ensure smooth travel. Practice historians debate for authenticity. You laugh at the image of someone carefully applying ale to a stubborn wheel, imagining it as both practical and somehow a mini celebration. It's a reminder that even in necessity, people found ways to inject humor, ritual, or experimentation into their labor. Nearby, baskets and sacks await their daily tasks. You notice how they vary, some woven tightly for grain, others loosely for vegetables or roots. Fringe evidence claims that farmers believed the pattern of weaving could influence how much crop would fit into the basket, a superstition that historians still debate. You hold a sack, feeling its coarse fibers rub against your fingers, and imagine the countless hands that have carried it across the same fields. Every tier, every repair, every knot tells a story of a life deeply embedded in the land. Small, seemingly insignificant items are scattered too. A pair of leather gloves, a half-broken rake, a bucket with a crack mended with tar. Odd as they seem, these are the real tools of survival, the objects that allow labor to continue despite imperfection. You pick up the gloves, feeling the thickness of worn leather, imagining the calloused palms of a farmer gripping a plow for hours on end. Fringe historians suggest some repairs were almost ceremonial, performed with incantations or blessings, though the evidence is circumstantial. Still, the act itself underscores the intimate, almost sacred relationship between farmer and tool. The air vibrates with the rhythm of preparation, sharpening blades, tightening straps, stacking sacks. You move from tool to tool, nodding the ingenuity of human adaptation. Every object has been modified, tested, or perfected in countless iterations. Even the simplest hoe reflects centuries of trial and error, centuries of observation, and centuries of learning passed from parent to child. It's humbling to realize that what you see as a mundane collection of implements is actually a repository of human knowledge, culture, and survival. By late morning, the rhythm of the field begins to synchronize with your own breathing. You swing a scythe experimentally, noting the tension in your arms and the precise timing required to cut evenly. You probably won't make it through a full day, but for this moment you participate in the subtle ballet of labor. Each tool is an instrument, each motion a note, and together they form a symphony of productivity, history, and human ingenuity. You step back, sweaty but exhilarated, admiring the simple elegance of the implements and the complex knowledge encoded within them. Finally, you pause to look across the field once more, taking in the patchwork of furrows, scattered tools, and distant figures. Every plow, scythe, and sickle is a silent testament to endurance, creativity, and adaptation. Fringe legends or not, it's clear that tools were more than tools. They were companions, teachers, and sometimes even confidants. The bond between farmer and implement is a narrative in itself, woven into the very fabric of Edwardian rural life. And as you take a deep breath of sun-warmed air, you feel the weight of that history settle around you, comforting, instructive, and a little mischievous in its persistence. You step into the furrows with a sense of anticipation, the earthy aroma of tilled soil filling your lungs as you prepare to follow the age-old rhythms of planting, growth, and harvest. Dawn has long passed, and the sun now warms your back, casting long shadows across the patchwork of fields. You probably won't survive the full intensity of the Edwardian crop cycle without aching limbs and a sunburn creeping under your collar. But that's precisely the beauty of it. You are immersed in a living calendar, one dictated by the seasons, the soil, and generations of knowledge. Historians still argue whether the meticulous cycles observed in these years were genuinely designed for efficiency, or if much of it persisted out of ritual, habit, or superstition. Either way, you can feel the invisible hand of tradition guiding every motion. The first stage of the cycle begins with soil preparation. You bend low, running your fingers through damp earth, noting its texture, crumbly, dark, and rich in organic matter. Farmers in the Edwardian countryside relied on simple but clever methods, plowing deep to aerate the soil, alternating fields to prevent exhaustion, and rotating crops to maintain fertility. You notice tiny worms wiggling through the furrows, an almost comedic reminder that even the smallest creatures have a role in the grand scheme. Fringe reports suggest that some villagers believed these worms were the souls of past farmers helping the land, a charmingly odd notion, though historians debate its prevalence. You smile at the thought of invisible supervisors wriggling beneath the soil, keeping an eye on your planting technique. Seeds are next, and you kneel to scatter them across a prepared bed. Each crop has its own season and ritual. Wheat planted in early spring, barley in staggered intervals to ensure staggered harvests, oats in fields less fertile but still valuable. You feel the weight of each tiny seed, each a promise of life, sustenance, and sometimes fortune. Some fringe accounts suggest that farmers whispered blessings or incantations over certain seeds, claiming that a polite word could coax a better yield. Whether it's superstition or clever mnemonic, the practice underscores the intimate relationship between farmer and soil, intention and result. Historians still debate whether these whispered rituals truly affected productivity or were primarily cultural expressions of hope and control. As you sow, you notice the subtle differences in technique. Some seeds pressed lightly into the earth with fingertips, others scattered with sweeping arcs designed to mimic natural dispersion. The rhythm of your hand mirrors the quiet music of the field, birdsong, the distant creak of a plow, and the gentle murmur of a nearby stream. You realize the planting process is both practical and meditative, a blend of precision and patience. Fringe reports even suggest that certain farmers planted according to astrological calendars, timing the sowing to moon phases or specific planetary alignments, a practice historians still examine with curiosity. You can't help but wonder if a crop grown under a waning moon tastes slightly different, or if it's merely a reflection of human imagination imposed on nature. Moving across the field, you encounter a patch where weeds stubbornly cling to the soil. You kneel to pull them, noting the contrast between wild growth and cultivated crop. It's a constant negotiation. Nature pushes back, and the farmer responds with vigilance, ingenuity, and sometimes frustration. Historians still argue whether certain weeding patterns were purely functional or embedded with symbolic meaning, but you feel the practicality as your hands drag roots from the earth, the smell sharp and slightly sweet. You glance at a crow perched on a nearby fence post, its dark eyes observing, and imagine it gossiping to its fellows about your inelegant technique. Even in the heart of serious labor, humor creeps in, if only in your mind. Irrigation is another vital component of the cycle. Small ditches, hand-dug channels, and even rudimentary sluices ensure that crops don't parch under the sun. You kneel beside a narrow trench, adjusting stones to direct water flow. Fringe accounts describe farmers constructing intricate mini reservoirs or using reflective surfaces to signal water levels, though historians still debate the scale and prevalence of such ingenuity. Whatever the truth, you can appreciate the cleverness required. A misaligned trench could mean flooded roots or parched soil, a delicate balance between control and chaos. You step back and watch the water meander through the field, glinting in sunlight, a silent witness to human persistence. In addition to water, nutrients must be replenished. You handle a small scoop of compost, it's scent earthy and pungent, and sprinkle it over furrows. Animal manure, once considered unpleasant, is here transformed into gold for the soil. Fringe tailies claim some farmers whispered apologies to the animals before spreading the manure, a gesture of respect and symbolic balance. Historians still debate whether such rituals were widespread or merely isolated practices, but standing here, you feel the sincerity embedded in centuries of repetitive labor. Every act, from scattering seeds to tending the soil, carries layers of meaning beyond mere survival. As you progress through the day, you witness the subtle choreography of labor in the fields. Some villagers move in pairs, coordinating steps to maximize efficiency while minimizing exhaustion. Others work solo, lost in thought or song, their hands guiding tools with practiced ease. There's a humor to it too, a child chasing a chicken across a plot, a dog nosing through a pile of hay, and the occasional ox stubbornly refusing to follow a plow line. These small moments punctuate the rigor of work with levity, a reminder that even in the most structured cycles, unpredictability is part of the rhythm. Harvest is the crescendo of the crop cycle. You stand with a scythe, slicing through tall stalks, each swing a combination of strength, technique, and intuition. The rhythm is almost hypnotic: cut, bend, sweep, repeat. Fringe accounts suggest some farmers incorporated song into their labor, believing melody could encourage growth or repel pests. Historians debate whether this was practical acoustics, superstition, or simple morale boosting, but the effect is undeniable. The day feels lighter, less grueling when accompanied by song or chant. You hum a tune under your breath, matching the cadence of your swings, and for a moment, time seems to bend. Thrashing follows harvesting, separating grain from chaff. You kneel beside a pile of wheat, using a flail in steady, rhythmic motion. Each strike is deliberate, every beat echoing across the field. Fringe sources suggest that the number of beats per bundle carried symbolic meaning, perhaps a prayer for abundance or protection from ill fortune. Historians still argue whether these symbolic acts influenced crop yield or were merely cultural markers. You pause to notice the interplay of movement and thought, the physicality of work paired with mental patterns, rituals, and humor. It's as much a mental exercise as it is a laborious one. Storage is another crucial step in the cycle. Grain is carefully gathered into sacks, then deposited in barns or granaries, structures built for both practicality and protection. You examine the stacks, noting the cleverness of ventilation channels, the strategic placement of beams to prevent collapse, and the small quirks like a feather tucked between bundles, believed to ward off vermin. Fringe historians still debate whether these were purely superstition or ingenious, low-tech pest management, but their presence underscores the blend of practicality and ritual in Edwardian farming. You touch a bag, feeling the weight of potential meals, taxes, and trade, a tangible reminder of labor's reward. Crop rotation ensures long-term soil fertility. You trace your hand over the tilled earth, noting where legumes will follow cereals, enriching nitrogen levels naturally. This system, deceptively simple, embodies centuries of observation and trial and error. Fringe accounts claim that certain rotation patterns were aligned with lunar calendars or ancient numerology, though historians still debate the validity. Regardless, you feel the intelligence embedded in the arrangement. It is both science and art, intuition and experimentation entwined in a daily practice that sustains life. As the sun begins to dip toward the horizon, you pause, brushing sweat from your brow, reflecting on the full cycle you've witnessed: preparation, planting, nurturing, harvesting, and storage. You notice the subtle interplay of practical knowledge, ritualized behavior, and human ingenuity. Each step is deliberate, each gesture laden with intention. Even the smallest quirky acts, whispered blessings, patterned hoeing, ritualized flailing, are embedded in the practical necessity of survival, forming a tapestry of labor and culture that has persisted for generations. You step back, surveying the field now dotted with harvested bundles and freshly tilled furrows, imagining the endless repetition of this cycle over centuries. Each rhythm, each method, each quirky tradition carries a story, a lesson, and a hint of humor. It's a living history, tangible beneath your boots and visible in the sweat, song, and subtle artistry of labor. Edwardian farming is not merely work, it's a dialogue between humans, the land, and time itself, a conversation written in seed, soil, and sun. And standing here, amidst the tools, water, and whispered rituals, you feel yourself part of that conversation, even if only fleetingly. You wander toward the livestock pens, the earthy aroma intensifying as you approach, a heady mixture of hay, manure, and something unmistakably alive. The clatter of hooves, low moos, and the occasional bleat fills the air. You probably won't survive a full day tending to animals without a fair amount of cursing and several awkward tumbles into mud. But here, in the presence of these creatures, you start to understand why they were both companions and co-laborers in Edwardian fields. Historians still argue whether the relationships between humans and livestock in this era were purely utilitarian or whether genuine bonds of affection existed. Standing here, watching the oxen shuffle in rhythm with their harnesses, you lean toward the latter. There's a subtle mutual understanding, a dialogue built on repetition, patience, and sometimes stubbornness. Oxen are the giants of the field, the slow-moving engines that pull plows through rich, resistant soil. You approach one, feeling the heat of its body and the coarse bristle of its hide against your hands. Fringe accounts suggest that farmers sometimes whispered encouragement to their oxen, tapping into an almost mystical belief that spoken words could coax greater strength or better cooperation. You smile at the thought of oxen as enchanted laborers, though in truth, these practices likely serve to synchronize human and animal effort, aligning attention, timing, and rhythm. You tighten the yoke, listening to the subtle creak of leather, and watch the ox settle into its own steady pace, as if understanding the stakes of the morning's work. Pigs, on the other hand, are unpredictable, mischievous, and remarkably opinionated. You lean over a pen, watching one snuffle aggressively at the mud, only to lunge at a fellow pig moments later in what seems like pure sport. Fringe reports claim that some Edwardian farmers believed pigs could sense approaching storms or bad luck, prompting elaborate rituals to placate or predict. Historians still debate whether this was genuine meteorological observation or a cultural myth. But as you observe the pigs' antics, it's hard not to imagine them as clever little oracles in their own right. Their intelligence and willfulness inject both humor and frustration into the daily routine, a reminder that livestock were not mere tools, they were active participants in farm life. Sheep dot the pasture nearby, smaller but no less essential. Their thick wool requires careful maintenance, and you see women shearing with practiced hands, tossing fleece into neatly stacked piles. The wool isn't just for warmth, it's currency, social capital, and craft material all at once. Fringe accounts claim that some shepherds would talk to their sheep as they sheared, perhaps to calm them, perhaps out of habit, and historians still debate the psychological versus practical purpose of these conversations. You chuckle at the image of a shepherd in full Edwardian garb, whispering gentle assurances to a particularly stubborn ewe, and then return your attention to the methodical rhythm of cutting, collecting, and bundling. Horses, smaller and swifter than oxen, are used both for labor and travel. You notice one trotting along a fenced path its rider, a village lad likely apprenticed to the manor, guiding it with subtle nudges of heels and reins. Horses were often treated with care bordering on reverence. Fringe sources suggest that some villagers believed feeding a horse in silence could enhance its speed or endurance, while historians debate whether such superstitions were widely observed or isolated. Watching the animal move gracefully, you recognize the intelligence, sensitivity, and power embedded in its gait. Every flick of its tail and tilt of its head is communication, negotiation, and understanding rolled into a living form. Chickens cluck and peck in a sunlit corner, scratching through dirt and leftover grain. Their chaotic energy contrasts sharply with the deliberate movements of oxen and horses. Fringe tailies claim that some farmers would mark the eggs with small symbols to ward off theft or evil, a quirky practice that historians still debate. You crouch low, noticing the subtle hierarchy among hens, the occasional squabble, and the rooster's loud proclamations of dominance. Even in such small creatures, human culture and superstition weave into the practicalities of survival, a reminder that Edwardian farms were ecosystems of both labor and lore. Watering and feeding routines are meticulous. You watch a farmer distribute hay in long, even lines for oxen, measuring portions with precision. Fringe accounts suggest that some livestock were fed special meals on certain days, accompanied by a whispered blessing or ritual chant intended to encourage fertility or health. Historians still debate whether these acts were effective in any physiological sense or purely symbolic. Regardless, the care and attention invested in feeding highlight a broader truth. These animals were integral to survival, both as labor and as sustenance, and the relationship was reciprocal, built on cooperation and respect. Cleaning is another essential part of animal husbandry, and you dive in with some trepidation. The stench is overwhelming, yet you can't help noticing the methodical efficiency of the villagers. Manure is collected not just for sanitation but as fertilizer, closing the loop between livestock and crops. Fringe reports suggest that some farmers created elaborate composting systems with layers of straw, dung, and ash, claiming they could increase crop yields significantly. Historians still debate the effectiveness, but standing here, you see the ingenuity, waste transformed into opportunity, smell into strategy. The balance between labor, economy, and practicality is almost artistic. Healthcare for livestock is surprisingly sophisticated. You watch a woman tend to a limp sheep, examining its leg, massaging muscles, and adjusting a makeshift splint. Fringe accounts suggest the use of herbal remedies, marigold poultices, willow bark infusions, and garlic-based salves, while historians argue whether these were effective treatments or merely placebo rituals. Regardless, the care reflects the deep investment in animal well-being. Each creature represents both food security and labor efficiency, making its survival critical to the broader system. Herding and movement require strategy. You watch a small group of children guiding sheep along narrow paths, learning patience, timing, and subtle cues from their elders. Fringe sources suggest that particular whistles, songs, or hand gestures were passed down as secret codes, though historians still debate how widespread such systems were. Observing the precision and coordination, you realize that these practices are not mere play. They are education, tradition, and survival rolled into a single activity. The interplay between human and animal intelligence is fascinating, each adapting to the other in a silent, almost symbiotic dialogue. Breeding is another layer of complexity. Farmers select the strongest, most fertile animals, ensuring the next generation can sustain labor and produce. Fringe accounts suggest that some farmers performed rituals during mating, perhaps to encourage vigor, though historians debate whether these were genuine beliefs or folkloric embellishments. Watching a pair of oxen guided toward pairing, you sense the deliberate care, the investment in genetics long before the science of genetics existed. The cyclical planning, selecting, breeding, and nurturing reflects a sophisticated understanding of continuity and resource management. Animals also provide social cues and humor. A mischievous pig rolling in mud can lighten a tense morning, a stubborn ox refusing to move can spark creative problem-solving, and a flock of geese can warn of an approaching visitor faster than any human lookout. Fringe stories even suggest that villagers assign personalities to their animals, a practice historians still debate for its prevalence. You grin at a pair of ducks arguing over a puddle, realizing that life on the farm is as much about observation, adaptation, and entertainment as it is about labor. As the day progresses, the interconnectedness of crops, animals, and humans becomes undeniable. Livestock fertilize fields, provide transport and labor, and even entertain and instruct young apprentices. The animals are embedded in the social and economic fabric, each with quirks, personalities, and roles that go beyond utility. Fringe accounts hint at festivals where animals were celebrated, blessed, or even humorously honored, a reminder that Edwardian farmers recognized the importance of morale, ritual, and symbolism in daily life. Historians still argue about the origins and prevalence of such practices, but their existence adds color and humanity to the rigid structures of fealty. By late afternoon, you pause at the edge of the pens, breathing in the warmth, the smells, and the faint vibration of life all around. You notice the subtle signs of well-being, animals resting comfortably, fur and wool clean and intact, hay evenly distributed. The human effort behind this is immense, coordinated, and sometimes invisible. And yet, despite exhaustion, frustration, and occasional chaos, there's humor, care, and pride woven into every task. You lean on the fence, watching the sun cast long shadows across the animals' backs, and feel the quiet lesson of Edwardian livestock. Labor and life are inseparable, and even the smallest quirk or ritual carries meaning, history, and, occasionally, a wink of humanity. The scent of baking bread and simmering stews drifts from the village cottages as you trudge back from the livestock pens, mingling with the lingering aroma of hay and freshly turned soil. You probably won't survive the full intensity of Edwardian rural life without tasting the peculiar combination of sustenance and scarcity. But it's here in the heart of everyday survival that the nuances of feasts, famine, and foodways reveal themselves. Historians still argue whether these meals were primarily dictated by necessity or by ritualized culture. But standing here, breathing in the mixture of smoke, herbs, and earth, it's clear that food in this era is as much about social structure and psychology as it is about nutrition. Bread dominates the diet, coarse and dense, often made from barley or mixed grains rather than refined wheat. You pick up a small chunk from a wooden trough, feeling its weight in your hand. It's not particularly pleasant to modern tastes, hard, chewy, and sometimes studded with husks, but it represents life itself. Fringe accounts suggest that some families would mark the loaves with symbols or letters before baking, claiming it would bring protection or prosperity. Historians still debate whether these markings were widespread superstitions or practical methods of distinguishing ownership. But either way, you can imagine a child peeking into the oven to see the strange shapes transform into sustenance. Vegetables are seasonal and often foraged or cultivated in small garden plots. Root crops like turnips, carrots, and parsnips dominate in winter, while peas, beans, and leafy greens fill the spring and summer tables. You kneel to inspect a basket of freshly dug carrots, still streaked with soil, and wonder at the ingenuity required to preserve them through months of frost. Fringe evidence suggests that some farmers buried vegetables in ash or straw, whispering protective charms to ward off rot. Historians continue to debate whether these practices had any measurable effect or were purely cultural rituals, but there's a certain charm in imagining your dinner literally blessed by tradition. It is rarer and usually reserved for special occasions, or perhaps for the Lord's table. Chickens, pigs, and the occasional goat provide protein, though preservation is a constant concern. You note the small smokehouses and salted barrels tucked into corners of barns and kitchens, ingenious solutions for extending the life of perishable foods. Fringe accounts even suggest that some Edwardian cooks would recite short chants while smoking or salting meat, claiming it enhanced flavor or prevented spoilage. Historians debate the prevalence and efficacy of such rituals, yet their presence underscores a mindset in which superstition and practicality were intertwined in daily sustenance. Cheese, butter, and dairy are essential supplements. You watch a woman churn butter, her hands moving with steady rhythm, almost meditative. The smell is rich and slightly tangy, a contrast to the blandness of bread and root vegetables. Some fringe sources suggest that adding herbs to butter was believed to enhance fertility, health, or even mood, though historians still question the extent of such practices. Regardless, the process is labor-intensive and precise. Separating curds, skimming whey, and shaping the final product requires skill and patience. You can't help but admire the ingenuity embedded in these small, everyday acts which turn raw materials into lasting nourishment. Feasts are rare but vibrant occasions, often tied to the agricultural calendar. Harvest celebrations, religious holidays, and manor events bring the community together, blending food, song, and ritual. You imagine a long table laden with pies, roasted fowl, cheese, and seasonal fruits, the air filled with laughter and storytelling. Fringe accounts claim that certain dishes were prepared to honor spirits of the land or ensure fertility for the next season. though historians still debate whether these were symbolic or merely narrative embellishments. You can picture the excitement, the planning, and the subtle negotiation of status as each family contributes what they can, creating a tapestry of abundance, however fleeting. Famine, in contrast, is an ever-present specter. You kneel beside a dry patch of earth where crops have failed, noting the cracks in the soil and the withered remains of last season's yield. The reality of scarcity shapes every action: rationing, seed preservation, and careful allocation of livestock. Fringe historians suggest that villagers sometimes resorted to obscure herbs or wild roots believed to sustain life in extremis, though effectiveness is debatable. Nevertheless, the creativity and resilience required to survive lean years underscore a fundamental truth. Edwardian rural life balanced delicacy with desperation, humor with hardship. You take a deep breath, imagining the tension in households as families negotiate survival and sustenance. Foodways are also social currency. You watch villagers exchange eggs, vegetables, and small baskets of grain at the market, each transaction accompanied by gossip, advice, or gentle ribbing. Some fringe sources suggest that subtle gestures, like offering a slightly larger portion or a more carefully selected vegetable, were interpreted as signals of goodwill, status, or even secret alliances. Historians continue to debate whether these exchanges were purely pragmatic or culturally codified, but you recognize the importance. Food binds, communicates, and enforces social hierarchies in ways beyond simple consumption. Cooking is a tactile, immersive experience. You kneel beside a hearth, feeling the warmth and watching sparks dance as wood crackles. Pots hang from hooks, bubbling with stews of beans, barley, and small amounts of meat. The aroma is comforting, a mixture of smoke, herbs, and slow-cooked sustenance. Fringe accounts suggest that stirring clockwise or counterclockwise could influence flavor or fortune, though historians debate the legitimacy of such claims. Standing there, you can't help but experiment, imagining your own clumsy hands tracing circles in a simmering pot while laughing at the absurdity and humanity of it all. Preservation techniques are surprisingly inventive. Salting, smoking, drying, and fermenting ensure that food lasts through harsh winters. You handle a jar of pickled vegetables, noting the sheen of brine and the careful sealing of the lid. Fringe reports suggest that some households whispered blessings over jars, invoking protection from spoilage. Historians still debate whether such rituals were effective or purely symbolic, yet their presence underscores a critical point. Survival is both material and cultural, a blend of ingenuity and belief. You imagine the care invested in each jar, each loaf, each bundle of herbs, a testament to labor and foresight. You pause to observe the interplay of labor, sustenance, and ritual across the village. Women move deftly between hearths and gardens. Children fetch water or feed animals. Men transport hay and grain, and the Lord Steward occasionally surveys progress with a critical eye. Every act, planting, harvesting, cooking, or storing, is part of a larger system that sustains life while reinforcing hierarchy. Fringe sources suggest that some food preparations were timed according to lunar or religious calendars, an idea still debated by historians. Regardless of accuracy, the intention is clear. Food is both necessity and expression, binding humans to earth, season, and tradition. Humor persists amid the rigor. You witness a child attempting to sneak a carrot from a basket, only to be caught by a sister who dramatically scolds him in exaggerated whispers. A pig snorts indignantly, toppling a small basket of herbs, prompting laughter and playful shouts from nearby adults. Even in the context of survival and scarcity, Edwardian villagers find room for levity, mischief, and human connection. It's a reminder that while food sustains the body, humor and storytelling sustain the spirit, often entwined with the very rituals and labor that ensure survival. By late afternoon, the village settles into a rhythm of completion and preparation. Fires are stoked for evening meals, livestock are fed and penned, and tools are cleaned and stored. The aroma of bread, stew, and roasting vegetables mingles with fatting sunlight, creating a sensory snapshot of Edwardian rural life. You stand amidst it all, savoring the blend of labor, ritual, superstition, and humor. Each loaf, each vegetable, each portion of meat tells a story of human ingenuity, resilience, and creativity, a living narrative that persists beyond the simplicity of survival. As dusk approaches, you reflect on the interplay of feast and famine, labor and ritual, practicality and superstition. The Edwardian countryside is a world in which foodways are deeply intertwined with social structure, environmental knowledge, and human ingenuity. From the coarse bread to the whispered blessings over seeds and jars, every aspect carries meaning. You feel the pulse of life that beats through the village, a rhythm maintained by sweat, care, and a touch of humor. Even as the day ends and the sun dips below the horizon, the story of sustenance lingers in your senses, a reminder that labor, creativity, and belief are inseparable in the dance of life. Twilight begins to soften the edges of the village, casting long, golden shadows across the fields and cottages. You probably won't survive the subtle demands of Edwardian domestic chores without a fair amount of exhaustion. But here, in the interplay of hearth, home, and social life, you start to grasp the unseen work that sustains both family and community. Historians still argue whether domestic labor in the Edwardian countryside was undervalued merely because it occurred inside homes, or whether it carried its own forms of social authority. But standing amidst the clatter of pots, the smell of baked bread, and the low hum of conversation, it's clear that this labor is vital, structured, and surprisingly inventive. Inside the cottages, you see the day's work laid bare. Women move deftly between the hearth, the spinning wheel, and the garden outside, their hands busy, their eyes scanning for both practical and social cues. You notice small quirks, a bowl placed just so to catch stray flour, a drying rack tilted to maximize sunlight, herbs hung precisely to preserve their potency. Fringe accounts suggest that some households whispered charms over their spinning wheels, claiming it would encourage smooth yarn or abundant textiles, though historians debate whether these were common practices or localized superstition. You grin at the idea of enchanted wool, imagining a shawl that might carry not just warmth but a whispered blessing. Children, apprenticed from an early age, balance chores with curiosity. You spot one carefully stirring a pot of beans while another gathers kindling, both moving in a rhythm learned more by observation than instruction. Fringe reports claim that small, seemingly playful acts, like tossing a pinch of herbs over the shoulder, were believed to bring good fortune to the household, though historians debate the prevalence of such rituals. The children's work is both labor and education, a hands-on curriculum in survival, socialization, and inherited wisdom. Watching them, you notice how their play overlaps with instruction. A dropped stick becomes a lesson in coordination, a mislaid basket a subtle experiment in problem-solving. Cooking dominates the interior landscape. Hearths blaze with controlled ferocity, casting flickering shadows across stone walls and wooden beams. You kneel to feel the warmth radiating from the oven, noting how heat, smoke, and smoke stains become part of the cottage's character. Meals are often simple, pottages of grains and vegetables, stews infused with herbs, occasional scraps of meat. Yet in these modest preparations, ingenuity shines. Fringe sources suggest that combining certain herbs or roots was believed to balance not only flavor but household fortune, a symbolic expression of care and foresight. Historians still argue whether these culinary rituals had tangible effects or served primarily psychological and social purposes. Water management inside cottages is another subtle but essential skill. You watch a woman carefully collect water from a nearby well, balancing the pail on her hip, her hand steady despite the weight. Spillage is minimized, and leftover water is repurposed for washing, livestock, or irrigation. Fringe accounts claim that some households whispered apologies to the spirits of wells or streams when drawing water, a practice historians continue to debate, yet its presence underscores the intimate awareness of natural resources. Every movement, from drawing water to scrubbing floors, carries dual importance: practicality and respect for the unseen forces believed to influence daily life. Textiles form another cornerstone of domestic labor. You see women spinning yarn, weaving cloth, and repairing garments. Their hands move with confidence, almost hypnotically, producing both functional and decorative pieces. Fringe reports suggest that certain patterns in weaving or embroidery were believed to convey protection, fertility, or prosperity, though historians still debate the validity of these claims. As you observe, it becomes clear that these small acts of creation are laden with cultural significance. Every stitch, every twist of fiber is a negotiation between utility, tradition, and human expression. Hearth and home are also spaces for storytelling, humor, and informal education. You overhear tales of mischievous animals, clever neighbors, and the occasional quip about a wayward lord or steward. Fringe accounts suggest that such storytelling sometimes included coded warnings, subtle critiques, or moral instruction, a practice historians still discuss. You Smile as a child retells a story about a clever pig outwitting its owner, and you recognize a timeless truth: Humor and narrative are as integral to domestic life as any chore, infusing daily labor with resilience, memory, and connection. Preservation continues inside the home. Smokehouses, cellars, and crocks hold the day's labor: salted meats, pickled vegetables, and stored grains. You examine a small clay jar, noting the careful sealing and the faint aroma of herbs infused into its contents. Fringe sources claim that jars were sometimes labeled with symbols for protection or prosperity, though historians debate the prevalence of this practice. The jars are not merely storage, they are repositories of foresight, culture, and the subtle interplay between survival and belief. Handling them, you feel the tangible weight of human ingenuity embedded in domestic routines. Cleaning and maintenance are constant undertakings. Floors are swept, walls brushed, and tools returned to carefully designated spots. Even the smallest act, wiping a counter, tending a fire, or repairing a handle, carries significance. Fringe accounts suggest that small rituals were performed during cleaning, from whispering apologies to the house spirits to arranging tools in a protective pattern. Historians debate whether these acts were universal or localized, but you can see the logic. Precision, care, and mindfulness extend the functionality and comfort of the home, while embedding subtle cultural expression into everyday tasks. Domestic spaces also serve as informal marketplaces. You notice women trading herbs, eggs, or handmade textiles with visiting neighbors, negotiating quantities, quality, and price. Fringe accounts suggest that certain gestures, words, or gifts were imbued with symbolic meaning, perhaps indicating alliances or subtle social hierarchies. Historians still argue about the codification of such exchanges, but observing the dance of commerce, diplomacy, and humor, you recognize an intricate social choreography. These interactions sustain more than material life, they reinforce relationships, expectations, and communal cohesion. Childcare is another subtle dimension of domestic labor. Infants and toddlers are rarely left unattended. Children are socialized and educated simultaneously. Fringe sources suggest that lullabies, whispered tales, or small rituals were used to instill values, courage, or protection, though historians debate the extent of these practices. You watch a mother gently rock a child while simultaneously checking a pot on the fire, her actions a fluid integration of care, labor, and culture. It's a reminder that domestic work extends beyond immediate survival. It shapes the next generation, encoding skills, knowledge, and cultural memory. Social signaling through domestic spaces is pervasive. The arrangement of hearths, tools, and furniture communicates order, respectability, and capacity to visitors. Fringe accounts claim that small adjustments, like the angle of a broom or placement of a pot, could subtly convey status or intent, a practice historians debate for universality. Observing the interior, you see these signals in action. Neat rows of jars, properly stacked firewood, and a clean hearth indicate competence, diligence, and attention to tradition. The mundane becomes meaningful, a language of labor and civility. Food preparation, domestic management, and care extend beyond the home's interior. Gardens, small orchards, and herb beds lie just beyond the walls, maintained with precision and attention to seasonal cycles. You walk among carrots, cabbages, and thyme, noting the integration of labor and ritual. Fringe accounts suggest that planting certain herbs at specific times or whispering over seedlings could influence both growth and household fortune, though historians debate the prevalence. Standing among the rows, you sense a continuity. The same practices inside and outside the cottage reflect a seamless rhythm of life, culture, and practical ingenuity. As night falls, you pause in the doorway, observing flickering candlelight, the soft hum of conversation, and the distant glow of manor windows. The domestic sphere, often overlooked in favor of fields or lords, emerges as a complex ecosystem of labor, creativity, ritual, and humor. Every hearth, spinning wheel, and cupboard carries knowledge, intention, and memory. Fringe and mainstream traditions intertwine seamlessly, creating a rich tapestry of daily life where survival, social order, and human ingenuity coexist. The village, quieting for the evening, feels alive in its subtleties, a testament to the hidden world of Edwardian domestic labor. Night deepens across the Edwardian countryside, the sky a pale wash of indigo with early stars peeking through the fading light. You trudge along the edges of the fields toward the village, the air cooling, carrying the earthy scent of soil, manure, and lingering smoke from the hearths. You probably won't survive the nocturnal tasks without a few bruises, mosquito bites, and a stiff back, but the rhythm of night labor has its own subtle, almost meditative beauty. Historians still argue whether nighttime work was strictly necessity-driven or if the Edwardians also sought a quiet connection to the cycles of nature. But standing here, the soft chorus of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, and the rhythmic clatter of water from troughs tell you it was a mix of both. Evening is far from idle. Fields must be checked for vulnerable crops and wayward animals. You approach a wheat field, feeling the softness of ripened stalks brushing against your fingertips. Fringe accounts suggest that some farmers walked their fields at dusk, whispering to the plants for protection against frost or vermin, a practice historians debate as either symbolic superstition or practical pest deterrent. You follow the rows with careful, measured steps, noting broken stalks, flattened patches, and the occasional crow pecking at grain. There's humor here too. A rogue rabbit darts across the furrows, and you imagine it outwitting generations of farmers with cheeky persistence. Water management continues under the moon's gentle glow. You follow the narrow ditches, listening to the soft ripple of water as it flows toward the fields. Irrigation channels must be cleared, small dams checked, and sluices adjusted to ensure crops survive the night. Fringe accounts claim some villagers believe that sprinkling water clockwise around the field would encourage abundance, while counterclockwise might ward off misfortune, though historians still debate the prevalence and efficacy of such rituals. You kneel to shift a small stone, feeling the wet mud cling to your fingers and realize the quiet intelligence behind every adjustment. Even a tiny misalignment could mean flooded roots or parched soil by morning. Animals are still active after dusk. Chickens roost noisily in the coops, pigs huff contentedly in pens, and a few sheep graze near their pens under the careful eye of a shepherd. You notice the subtle signals, a low grunt indicating hunger, a shift of weight signaling readiness to return to shelter. Fringe reports claim that some shepherds use coded whistles or songs at night, believed to comfort or guide their flock, though historians debate whether this was widespread or highly localized. You whistle experimentally, listening as a curious ewe lifts her head, and you marvel at the understated dialogue between human and animal. Nighttime also brings security concerns. You see a watchman patrolling the perimeter, lantern in hand, eyes scanning for trespassers or predators. Fringe sources suggest that farmers sometimes employed small charms, stones, or salt lines around barns or fields to deter nocturnal thieves or wild animals, though historians still debate whether these were practical deterrents or largely symbolic. You notice the care in each step, soft footfalls to avoid startling animals, the careful rotation of lanterns to maintain visibility without causing panic, the quiet signaling between households when unexpected sounds arise. Even in darkness, vigilance and ingenuity are constant companions. The hearth continues to anchor evening domestic life. You return to the cottages, where small fires burn low, casting warm light over the wooden floors and simple furnishings. Fringe reports suggest that some families whispered protective prayers to the fire before retiring for the night, claiming it would safeguard the household while they slept, though historians debate how common such practices were. You lean against the doorframe, watching smoke curl toward the rafters, and notice the rhythm of domestic tasks winding down. Last-minute water collection, final feeding of animals, careful stacking of firewood for the night. Children, tired but still curious, move quietly about. Some tuck themselves into beds or straw-filled sacks, while others linger, listening to elders recount tales of clever animals, mischievous neighbors, or legendary harvests. Fringe accounts suggest that stories told at night often contain moral lessons or warnings about laziness, overconfidence, or disrespect, though historians still debate the prevalence of such didactic storytelling. You sit with them for a moment, listening to the soft cadence of voices blending humor, superstition, and instruction, and realize that education extends far beyond formal labor. It seeps into narrative, song, and communal memory. Night also reveals the subtle interplay of observation and superstition in domestic life. You notice herbs hung above doorways, small symbols etched into walls, and pots arranged in deliberate patterns. Fringe accounts claim these practices warded off misfortune, encouraged fertility, or attracted good harvests, though historians debate their universality and effectiveness. Regardless, their presence emphasizes that Edwardian villagers lived in a world where practicality and belief intertwined seamlessly. Every arrangement carries meaning, purpose, and sometimes a dash of playful ingenuity. Moonlight illuminates paths to barns and sheds, where remaining tools are inspected and stored. You walk among plows, scythes, and yokes, noting the shadows that stretch like elongated fingers across the dirt floor. Fringe reports suggest that some farmers would speak softly to tools at night, a subtle acknowledgement of their importance and care, though historians still debate whether this was symbolic or functional. You run your hand along a plowshare, feeling the cool metal, and realize that even in darkness, the relationship between laborer and implement is preserved, a ritual of respect, maintenance, and continuity. Pest control is surprisingly active at night. You hear the skitter of rats or mice near grain stores, and small traps and deterrents are checked carefully. Fringe accounts suggest that the arrangement of certain grains, ashes, or herbs could influence rodent activity, though historians debate whether these methods were based on observation, superstition, or a mix of both. Watching the meticulous inspection, you admire the blend of vigilance, practical ingenuity, and tradition embedded in every nighttime action. The farmer's eye must remain sharp even after a long day of labor. Evening gatherings are rare but meaningful. You notice small clusters of villagers exchanging news, sharing jokes, or discussing plans for the following day. Fringe sources suggest that even minor nocturnal meetings contained subtle lessons about responsibility, community hierarchy, and practical problem-solving, though historians debate their structure and frequency. You overhear a woman explaining how to rotate crops efficiently, a man recounting livestock breeding tips, and a child offering humorous commentary, and you see how knowledge circulates, strengthened by humor, repetition, and observation. You pause to listen to the sounds of the night, distant owls, rustling leaves, and the occasional snort of livestock settling in. Each sound carries information: the health of animals, the approach of weather, or the presence of intruders. Fringe accounts suggest that villagers interpreted these sounds with almost ritualistic attention, assigning meaning beyond the obvious, though historians debate whether this was systematic observation or folklore. You feel yourself attuning to these subtle cues, realizing that night is not empty. It is alive with data, warning, and guidance, as vital as any daylight labor. As midnight approaches, you take stock of the day's labor, ritual, and quiet observation. The interplay of crops, animals, domestic management, and superstition has created a web of continuity and survival. Fringe and mainstream practices blend seamlessly. A whispered charm, a careful alignment of tools, a rhythmic feed or watering, each act contributes to the subtle machinery of Edwardian rural life. You notice the soft flicker of moonlight on roofs, the shimmer of dew beginning to settle on fields, and the gentle hum of a world preparing for another day. Finally, you lean against a fence post, letting the cool night air wash over you. You watch the interplay of shadow and starlight, listening to the quiet symphony of the countryside, the sigh of animals, the whisper of wind through the fields, and the faint laughter of children in their beds. Edwardian nighttime labor, both practical and ritualistic, humor-infused and deeply attentive, has a rhythm all its own. It's a world where survival, superstition, and humor are inseparable, and where even the smallest acts, watering a plant, checking a trough, whispering to a tool, carry centuries of human ingenuity, care, and persistence. The first hints of dawn stretch across the horizon, brushing fields with a soft, pearly light. You trudge along the dew-laden paths between furrows and cottages, the air crisp and fragrant with earth, grass, and lingering smoke from evening hearths. You probably won't survive the sheer repetition of Edwardian labor cycles without aching muscles and a stubborn sense of fatigue, but dawn has a magic all its own, the promise of continuity, renewal, and subtle discoveries you can't make in the heat of midday. Historians still argue whether early morning labor was primarily practical or if it carried symbolic significance tied to celestial cycles. But standing here, noticing how light reveals textures and shadows, it's hard not to imagine both. The village awakens in stages. Chickens stir, clucking nervously as the light filters through the coop. You pause to observe a young girl gently coaxing a reluctant hen into laying her morning egg. Fringe accounts suggest that some Edwardian villagers whispered to hens at sunrise, claiming it encouraged better yields or warded off misfortune, though historians debate how common this practice truly was. You grin, imagining the absurdity of instructing a hen, yet recognize that these rituals fostered a rhythm of observation, patience, and care. Even minor gestures held layers of meaning. You move toward the garden, where leaves glisten with dew and roots peek shyly from the soil. Morning is ideal for tending crops, harvesting fragile greens, inspecting for pests, and starting the day's irrigation. Fringe sources suggest that sprinkling dew in a particular pattern or timing harvests to align with specific lunar phases could influence growth or longevity of produce. Historians still debate the validity, but standing here, hand brushing against soft spinach leaves, you sense the careful attention, ritual, and subtle experimentation embedded in every movement. It's not merely labor, it's observation honed over generations. Livestock, too, are stirred by the gentle light. You watch oxen stretch, shift weight, and emit low, contented bellows. Cows meander toward the barn, guided by a mix of instinct, experience, and the soft prodding of farmers. Fringe accounts suggest that early morning feeding rituals were sometimes accompanied by whispered blessings or songs, believed to encourage fertility, health, or compliance. Historians still argue whether these practices were pragmatic or primarily cultural, yet you notice their effect: calm animals, attentive workers, and a rhythm that binds human and beast in mutual understanding. The tasks of dawn are repetitive but revealing. You kneel in a small plot, inspecting soil moisture, noticing where frost has lingered, and uncovering minor intrusions from insects or rodents. Fringe reports suggest that farmers read subtle signs, broken leaves, displaced soil, or the behavior of ants as omens for the day's success or failure. Historians debate whether this constituted proto-scientific observation or superstition, yet the methodical attention and pattern recognition are undeniable. You pause, noting the soft hum of the morning, the chirping of birds, and the distant creak of a water wheel, realizing that sensory awareness is as vital as physical labor. Breakfast in the village mirrors practicality and continuity. You witness porridge being stirred, bread being cut, and milk poured into small wooden bowls. Fringe sources claim that some households invoked short protective phrases before consuming the first meal, blending superstition with sustenance. Historians still argue the prevalence, but standing there, you observe the human need to merge nourishment with ritual. Humor seeps in as a young boy attempts to pour too much milk, spilling it onto the table, and you can't help but smile. Even small mishaps become stories, lessons, and laughter, a reminder that life in Edwardian villages is structured yet vividly human. Watering and irrigation require early attention. You walk along narrow channels, adjusting small sluices, clearing leaves, and redirecting flow where necessary. Fringe accounts suggest that the pattern and timing of water movement sometimes adhered to ritualistic beliefs about fertility or crop vitality, though historians debate how standardized these practices were. Each adjustment is meticulous, guided by intuition, observation, and experience. The soft splash of water against soil, the gleam of wet leaves in the nascent sun, and the quiet murmur of the stream create an almost meditative rhythm that carries beyond mere necessity. Field inspections continue with almost ceremonial thoroughness. You brush fingers across the heads of wheat, noting the plumpness of grains and subtle signs of disease or pest activity. Fringe accounts suggest that some farmers would gently whisper encouragement to the crops, a practice historians debate, but one that exemplifies the intimate relationship between humans and the land. Even the most mundane labor is imbued with observation, patience, and a touch of humor as you notice a rabbit daringly nibbling on the edge of the field and consider its audacity in the context of centuries of human-animal negotiation. Mid-morning brings communal labor. Villagers gather for synchronized tasks, plowing, weeding, and transporting produce. Fringe sources indicate that small songs or chants were sometimes incorporated to maintain rhythm and morale. Historians still debate whether these were practical mnemonics or ritualized tradition, but observing the interplay of voices, motion, and laughter, it's clear that group labor strengthens both productivity and social bonds. You notice the subtle corrections, the gentle teasing, and the humor that softens exertion, an almost universal human strategy to make grueling work bearable. Livestock feeding and milking align with crop care, reinforcing the cyclical, interdependent nature of farm life. Cows are guided gently into stalls, milk is drawn with care, and feeding schedules adhered to with surprising precision. Fringe accounts suggest that particular chants or hand gestures were believed to encourage production or health, though historians debate their prevalence and efficacy. The result, regardless, is impressive coordination. Humans, animals, and land functioning as a single, living system of labor and attention. By late morning, attention shifts to tool maintenance. Scythes are sharpened, plowshares checked, and spades cleaned of mud. Fringe accounts suggest that some farmers performed small rituals over their tools to ensure performance and longevity, a practice historians continue to analyze. You handle a spade, noticing the cool metal and the worn wood, feeling the accumulated history embedded in every groove and nick. Humor creeps in as you accidentally catch your boot on a loose stone, imagining how generations of farmers would have endured the same minor clumsiness. Labor and levity coexist in unspoken tandem. Field rotation is also planned at dawn. You kneel to examine soil composition, the presence of weeds, and moisture levels, preparing for future crops. Fringe sources claim that crop placement sometimes adhered to astrological or numerological beliefs, though historians debate their pervasiveness. Regardless, the meticulous planning reflects foresight, observation, and a nuanced understanding of the land's rhythms. You step back, surveying the patchwork of fields, and realize that each plot is not merely dirt. It is strategy, labor, ritual, and hope embedded in the earth. By midday, a sense of momentum builds. Labor, observation, and subtle rituals intertwine seamlessly. You hear the rhythmic clack of flails from distant barns, the soft murmur of water, the occasional shout of a child at play. Fringe accounts suggest that some early morning routines set the tone for the entire day, and historians debate whether such practices were psychologically or ritually motivated. You note the harmony, the small bursts of humor, and the communal understanding that life, work, and care are inseparable in this world. Finally, as the sun climbs higher, you pause to drink from a small wooden cup of fresh water, feeling the cool liquid revive tired muscles and sharpen awareness. You reflect on the interlocking cycles of crop care, animal tending, domestic labor, and ritualized practice observed at dawn. Even in the quietest moments, the depth of observation, patience, and subtle humor is evident. Fringe and mainstream traditions coexist, creating a living tapestry of knowledge, belief, and effort that underpins Edwardian rural life. You take a deep breath, inhaling the mixture of soil, herbs, and early morning air, and realize that survival is as much about careful observation, ritual, and humor as it is about physical exertion. The sun climbs higher, painting fields and cottages with a warm, honeyed glow. You trudge along the narrow paths between rows of crops, feeling the soil give slightly beneath your boots, the scent of damp earth mingling with hay and smoke from distant hearths. You probably won't survive a full day in the Edwardian countryside without developing a profound respect for both endurance and humor. But here, in the interplay of work, observation, and ritual, there's a rhythm that keeps life moving forward. Historians still argue whether the structure of daily labor was purely necessity-driven, or if social expectation and tradition were equally compelling forces. But standing here, observing villagers immersed in their routines, it feels like a seamless blend of all three. Harvesting is underway in earnest. You watch a man bend low, scythe in hand, cutting stalks of wheat with careful, rhythmic swings. Fringe accounts suggest that some farmers muttered small encouragements to their crops, claiming it ensured plump grains or warded off misfortune, though historians debate whether this was a practical mnemonic or a localized superstition. Regardless, the repetition has its own meditative cadence, each stroke precise, each bundle of wheat a tangible reward for knowledge, skill, and patience. You bend beside him, noticing the subtle interplay of sweat, focus, and humor as a stubborn stalk defies the blade, prompting a shared chuckle over the stubbornness of both plant and laborer. Field labor is rarely solitary. Villagers coordinate in small groups, managing the rhythm of plowing, planting, and harvesting. You watch a coordinated effort. One person swings a scythe, another binds sheaves, while a third carries bundles toward the granary. Fringe sources indicate that work songs or chants were sometimes used to maintain morale and rhythm, though historians debate whether these were practical mnemonics or ritualized tradition. You hum along, noticing the way sound, motion, and laughter fuse into an efficient workflow, and marvel at how collective effort softens the fatigue of labor while reinforcing social cohesion. Animals remain central. Oxen pull loaded carts of grain with steady determination, guided by practiced hands. Pigs snuffle contentedly near mud patches, sheep shuffle under the shepherd's watchful eye, and chickens dart across sunlit paths, pecking opportunistically at stray grains. Fringe reports suggest that certain gestures, calls, or songs could influence animal behavior, though historians debate their prevalence and efficacy. You lean close to an ox, feeling the warmth of its body, listening to its low rumble, and recognize the subtle dialogue between human and animal. Cooperation built on observation, patience, and quiet negotiation. Tools are maintained even as labor proceeds. You watch a woman sharpen knives for cutting vegetables and grains, adjusting angles with careful precision. Fringe accounts suggest that whispering a small protective phrase over tools was believed to enhance performance or longevity, though historians argue about the universality of such practices. Observing the care taken in both routine labor and tool maintenance, you realize that attention to detail extends beyond mere efficiency. It's a fusion of practicality, superstition, and ritualized mindfulness. Even humor is embedded. A dropped knife prompts a quick jest about rebellious steel, lightening the mood amid arduous work. The midday meal is modest but essential. You sit alongside laborers, consuming coarse bread, salted meat, and boiled vegetables. Fringe sources claim that specific prayers or phrases were sometimes recited to honor the food or protect the household, though historians debate the prevalence. Sharing sustenance strengthens social bonds, offers a pause for observation, and renews energy for the day's continuation. A young boy spills water over his lap, earning gentle teasing from his sister, and you notice how humor persists as an essential counterbalance to the rigors of survival. Even small mishaps become narrative threads woven into communal life. Irrigation and field care continue as shadows short. You kneel to inspect the soil, noticing dry patches, minor pest damage, and uneven moisture. Fringe accounts suggest that sprinkling water in deliberate patterns or timing watering to the sun's angle was believed to enhance growth, though historians debate the prevalence of such practices. Observation is key. Every inch of soil, every leaf, every subtle sign informs the next decision. The rhythm of attention, assessment, and correction becomes almost musical, punctuated occasionally by birdsong or the braying of a distant donkey. Crop rotation and planting are ongoing considerations. You follow villagers as they assess which fields to plant with beans, grains, or root vegetables next season. Fringe reports claim that certain planting sequences were guided by superstitious numerology or lunar cycles, while historians still debate their influence. Regardless of belief, the attention to soil health, moisture levels, and seasonal trends demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of agricultural sustainability. Every decision carries weight. Miscalculation can impact survival, while careful observation can ensure a prosperous harvest. Livestock management demands continuous attention. You watch a shepherd move his flock, encouraging them toward new grazing areas. Pigs are fed carefully measured portions, and chickens are counted and secured in coops. Fringe sources suggest that subtle gestures, whistles, or even songs could influence animal compliance, though historians debate how widespread such practices were. Observing the interaction, you note the nuanced understanding of behavior, timing, and communication. The animals are neither subservient tools nor pets, but active participants in the daily rhythm of survival. Waste management is integral. You see manure being collected to fertilize fields, leftover vegetables fed to pigs, and spoiled grains repurposed where possible. Fringe accounts suggest that layering materials in compost heaps according to ritual or symbolic patterning was believed to enhance fertility, though historians argue whether these practices were effective or purely traditional. Even in what seems like mundane labor, careful observation, foresight, and ingenuity are evident. Humor and ingenuity often accompany the tasks. A pig mischievously overturning a pile prompts gentle laughter and improvisation. Even minor repairs are essential. Fences, gates, and storage bins are checked and mended where needed. Fringe accounts claim that some repairs were accompanied by ritualistic words or small gestures to ensure longevity, though historians debate prevalence. You notice the subtle integration of practicality and belief. A gate repaired with care is not only functional but symbolically protective. The interplay of observation, labor, and ritual continues seamlessly, demonstrating the Edwardian capacity to merge survival with tradition. Child labor contributes meaningfully. You see children carrying small loads of vegetables, gathering water, and helping with animals. Fringe reports suggest that playful mimicry of adult routines often carried instructional value, while historians argue whether this constituted formal apprenticeship or informal education. Regardless, the children's presence maintains continuity. They learn, participate, and infuse labor with humor and curiosity, ensuring that knowledge, rhythm, and observation pass from one generation to the next. You pause at the granary, noting the careful stacking of sheaves, the alignment of sacks, and the protection from moisture and pests. Fringe sources suggest that small symbols etched into storage containers were believed to safeguard contents, though historians debate how widespread these practices were. Even small acts reflect attention, foresight, and ritual significance. Humor persists. A squirrel attempting a raid on stored grain prompts gentle laughter and strategic improvisation, a reminder that unpredictability is ever present, even amid careful planning. By mid-afternoon, you reflect on the sheer complexity of daily labor. Fieldwork, livestock care, domestic management, observation, ritual, and humor intertwine seamlessly. Every movement carries intention, knowledge, and subtle cultural significance. Fringe and mainstream traditions coexist. Whispered blessings, tool maintenance, observation of natural signs, and playful improvisation combine to form a living system of labor and survival. You notice the pulse of life in motion, the subtle choreography that allows Edwardian villages to thrive despite physical demands, environmental unpredictability, and social hierarchy. The sun begins its slow descent, casting long shadows across the patchwork of fields, livestock, and cottages. You take a breath, noting the warm, earthy scent of soil, the faint tang of livestock, and the quiet laughter of children at play. The rhythm of daily labor, observation, and ritual has created an intricate living system, one in which survival is inseparable from humor, ingenuity, and cultural memory. You lean against a fence post, letting the warmth of late afternoon sun soak into your shoulders and feel the steady heartbeat of Edwardian rural life, persistent, inventive, and deeply human. The late afternoon sun softens to a golden glow, spilling over the fields and cottages, and you trudge along narrow tracks worn smooth by countless boots and hooves. You probably won't survive the endless attention to detail that Edwardian villagers demanded of themselves without a keen eye and an endless sense of patience. But here, in the waning light, there is a quiet beauty to the interconnected rhythms of life. Historians still argue whether these labor routines were primarily dictated by necessity or whether social custom and ritual reinforced them, but standing amidst the fields and cottages, you feel the answer is inevitably both. You pass the grazing sheep, noting the way their shadows stretch long and merge with the furrows of plowed soil. Fringe accounts suggest that farmers sometimes spoke quietly to their animals as they tended them in late afternoon, believing that gentle words ensured compliance or fertility. Historians debate how prevalent or effective such practices truly were, but you can see their charm, a simple act of attentiveness that reinforces bonds between human and animal. You lean down, gently touching the coarse fleece of a ewe, feeling the warmth and life pulsing beneath the wool, and realize that observation is as much about empathy as it is survival. The fields themselves demand constant monitoring. You kneel beside ripening crops, brushing hands over wheat and barley heads, checking for signs of disease, pest intrusion, or uneven ripening. Fringe sources claim that small rituals, like tracing symbols in the soil or speaking quietly to the plants, could promote healthy growth. Historians still debate whether these rituals were symbolic, psychological, or functional. Regardless, the act underscores the precision and attentiveness necessary in Edwardian agriculture. Each plant, each stalk, each row is a living entity demanding careful, continuous observation. You continue toward the orchard, where apples and pears hang heavy on their branches, the leaves catching the fatting sunlight. Fruit harvest is delicate work. Bruised or overripe produce can spoil quickly. Fringe reports suggest that orchard keepers sometimes recited short verses while picking to ward off decay or misfortune, though historians argue the prevalence of these practices. You reach for a particularly firm apple, nodding its subtle sheen, and chuckle quietly as a bird swoops in, eyeing your selection. Even amid disciplined labor, humor creeps in, reminding you that Edwardian villagers approached life with a balance of seriousness and playfulness. Domestic chores continue unabated in the cottages. Women carry water, tend fires, and prepare evening meals with a mix of skill, precision, and improvisation. You pause to watch a mother knead dough, her hands moving with practiced rhythm, flour dusting the air like fine mist. Fringe accounts suggest that the direction of kneading or brief spoken blessings might influence the quality of the bread, though historians debate the validity. The care, repetition, and ritual embedded in these mundane acts reveal a world where practicality and cultural meaning intertwine seamlessly. Children still play amid work, carrying small loads, running errands, and observing adult routines. Fringe sources claim that mimicry and playful experimentation were essential for teaching responsibility and skill, though historians argue about whether this was structured pedagogy or informal learning. You watch a boy balancing a basket of eggs while dodging chickens, the potential chaos mitigated by his concentration and creativity. Humor once again underscores labor. Even mistakes, spills, or miscalculations become teachable moments and stories that will be retold, strengthening communal memory and bonds. Watering, tending, and irrigation continue in tandem with harvest and domestic activity. You follow narrow ditches, adjusting small sluices and redirecting flow where the sun has parched the soil. Fringe accounts suggest that certain patterns of watering were believed to enhance fertility or ward off misfortune, though historians debate the prevalence. The meticulous care demonstrates a nuanced understanding of environmental cycles, timing, and observation. Every movement is deliberate. Mismanagement risks crop loss, yet careful attention ensures both survival and abundance. Livestock feeding is coordinated to ensure both efficiency and animal health. You see pigs rooting through prepared feed, cows grazing on cut hay, and chickens moving in synchronized chaos. Fringe reports claim that animal caretakers sometimes employed hand signals, subtle whistles, or quiet words to influence behavior, though historians debate their frequency. Observing the interplay of humans and animals, you realize that labor is as much about subtle communication and negotiation as it is about physical effort. Even humor is strategic. A startled chicken prompts gentle laughter, a reminder that levity and attentiveness coexist in survival. Tool maintenance becomes a focal point in the waning light. Scythes are sharpened, spades cleaned, and wheel rims inspected for cracks. Fringe accounts suggest that whispering protective phrases over tools might encourage longevity or efficiency, though historians debate their pervasiveness. The act of maintenance is both practical and symbolic. Care taken at this stage ensures that labor continues smoothly tomorrow, reinforcing the cyclical nature of rural life. You handle a scythe, feeling the cool steel in your palms, and reflect on how skill, observation, and mindfulness converge in these seemingly mundane acts. By late afternoon, village life begins to show subtle signs of winding down. Work continues, but at a slightly slower, more deliberate pace. Fringe reports indicate that some households performed small rituals to signify transition from labor to rest, extinguishing fires in a particular order, arranging tools carefully, or whispering short blessings over the threshold. Historians debate the universality of such practices, but their purpose is clear. The day's rhythm is acknowledged and respected, creating continuity between labor, rest, and cultural memory. Community coordination remains ongoing. You notice neighbors exchanging vegetables, seeds, or advice while simultaneously sharing humor, minor complaints, or lighthearted exaggeration about the day's events. Fringe sources suggest that these exchanges were subtly coded, conveying social cues, alliances, or humor, though historians debate the specificity and pervasiveness. Observing the interactions, you recognize the complexity. Survival is reinforced not only by physical labor but also by social negotiation, shared knowledge, and the gentle mediation of communal bonds. Evening meal preparation accelerates. Fires are stoked, pots filled, and ingredients gathered from gardens and storage. Fringe reports claim that particular arrangements of food or brief spoken phrases could protect the household, ensure abundance, or convey respect, though historians debate prevalence. Regardless, the care and intentionality of preparation demonstrates a fusion of practicality, ritual, and humor. You watch a young boy attempt to carry a pot too heavy for him, earning a gentle rebuke and a shared laugh, a small, timeless human tableau. As dusk approaches, observation extends to the wider landscape. You walk along the periphery of fields, noting shadows cast by barns, fences, and trees, listening for distant animal sounds or signs of weather change. Fringe accounts suggest that villagers interpreted environmental cues as omens or guidance, a practice historians continue to debate. The skill of observation is finely tuned. Even subtle signs, a bent branch, a shifting cloud, the scent of damp earth, can inform decisions about labor, storage, and livestock care. You inhale deeply, appreciating the sensory richness of the moment. Sight, smell, sound, and even touch inform both immediate survival and future planning. Finally, as nightfall encroaches, you pause atop a small hill overlooking the village. The sun dips below the horizon, and long shadows stretch across fields, cottages, and livestock. You see the intertwining of labor, observation, ritual, humor, and community play out in every movement. Fringe and mainstream practices coexist in a living, dynamic system, where every chore, story, and gesture contributes to survival, continuity, and social cohesion. You exhale slowly, letting the day's rhythm sink in, aware that tomorrow will begin anew, and that the intricate dance of Edwardian rural life, sweat, ingenuity, superstition, and laughter will continue in perpetuity. The night has finally descended, soft and velvety, yet the village is far from silent. You trudge along the narrow lanes, the scent of damp earth and lingering hearth smoke mingling in the cool air. You probably won't survive the sheer attentiveness demanded by nocturnal chores without developing a deep respect for both patience and humor, but the Edwardian countryside thrives in these quiet hours. Historians still argue whether night labor was purely practical or if it incorporated ritual and social expectation, but standing here, listening to the subtle sounds of life, you sense it was both a delicate dance between necessity, observation, and inherited tradition. Animals are central to nighttime activity. Chickens roost quietly in their coops, pigs huff contentedly in pens, and sheep settle into soft hay. You notice the shepherd moving among them, low lantern in hand, whispering gentle directions to encourage compliance. Fringe accounts suggest that farmers sometimes spoke softly to their animals to influence fertility, health, or mood, though historians debate whether this was widespread. Regardless, the effect is evident: calm animals, attentive humans, and a sense of mutual understanding. Humor persists even here. A pig snorts at the lantern's flicker, and you chuckle at the small rebellion of a creature accustomed to constant human oversight. Water management continues under the moon's silver glow. You follow narrow irrigation channels, clearing debris, adjusting sluices, and checking the flow to ensure the next day's crops will not suffer. Fringe sources claim that sprinkling water in particular patterns or aligning adjustments with lunar cycles was believed to encourage fertility or ward off misfortune, though historians debate their prevalence. Standing knee-deep in a muddy ditch, you notice the reflective surface of the water catching starlight and realize that night labor is not merely functional. It is quietly meditative, blending observation, superstition, and attentive care. Field inspection extends to nocturnal pests. You hear the skittering of mice near stored grain, the rustle of insects, and the soft tread of foxes approaching the edges of cultivated land. Fringe reports suggest that subtle arrangements of herbs, stones, or traps were employed to deter them, though historians debate their effectiveness and cultural significance. You crouch low, moving with precision, observing the interplay of natural forces and human ingenuity. The thrill is quieter than daytime excitement, but no less consequential. Survival at night requires focus, care, and a healthy dose of wit to adapt to unpredictable challenges. Domestic chores persist even as the village sleeps. You enter the faintly lit cottage interiors, where small fires burn low, casting warm, flickering light over wooden floors, utensils, and furniture. Women move quietly, tending hearths, collecting water, and preparing ingredients for the next day's meals. Fringe accounts suggest that brief protective blessings over fires and tools were common, though historians debate their prevalence. Observing these routines, you note the seamless integration of practicality, ritual, and subtle humor. A spilled pinch of flour prompts a quiet laugh and a whispered apology to both hearth and household, reflecting the blend of discipline and human levity that defines domestic life. Children, though tired, are often still alert, learning the rhythms of work and responsibility through play and observation. You see a young girl arranging bundles of herbs, mimicking the precise work of her mother, while a boy quietly helps feed chickens. Fringe reports suggest that playful mimicry was a key method of instruction, though historians debate whether this constituted structured education or informal apprenticeship. Regardless, it ensures continuity. The next generation absorbs labor, ritual, and communal wisdom, preparing to sustain the delicate equilibrium of village life. Tool care remains an understated but crucial task. Scythes are sharpened, spades cleaned, and wheel rims inspected by lantern light. Fringe sources claim that small phrases or blessings were sometimes uttered over tools to enhance their durability, though historians debate whether these practices were widespread or symbolic. You hold a scythe, feeling the cool metal and worn wood beneath your fingers, and understand that tool maintenance is both practical preparation and a subtle acknowledgement of human ingenuity, effort, and attention to detail. Even humor appears here. A dropped hammer earns a gentle admonition and a shared laugh, reinforcing communal bonds while maintaining vigilance. Evening storytelling intertwines with labor, softening fatigue and reinforcing culture. You hear whispered tales of clever animals, mischievous neighbors, or legendary harvests, often accompanied by chuckles or gasps. Fringe accounts suggest that storytelling sometimes conveyed moral lessons, practical advice, or social commentary, though historians debate the specificity and intent of these narratives. Observing children listening intently, adults gesturing subtly, and occasional laughter punctuating the quiet, you realize that oral tradition sustains not just entertainment, but also education, social norms, and communal cohesion. Lighting is minimal but deliberate. Lanterns, torches, and small fires illuminate only where necessary, conserving fuel and creating pockets of shadow that enhance observation skills. Fringe sources claim that lantern placement sometimes followed symbolic patterns or practical superstitions to protect against misfortune, though historians argue how common this was. You notice the way light glances off walls, tools, and leaves outside, casting elongated shadows that reveal subtle details otherwise hidden. Observation, attentiveness, and subtle ritual combine here to guide labor, safety, and understanding of one's environment. Evening gatherings, though small, are meaningful. Villagers exchange observations about crop health, animal behavior, or weather forecasts while sharing laughter and lighthearted commentary on minor mishaps. Fringe accounts suggest that these gatherings sometimes involved subtle social signaling or encoded advice, though historians debate their prevalence. Observing the interactions, you appreciate the delicate balance between labor, humor, and cultural transmission that sustains both productivity and social harmony. By late night, maintenance tasks extend to the storage of harvested crops. Grain, vegetables, and preserved items are inspected, stacked, and sometimes rearranged for optimal protection. Fringe sources suggest that symbols or small rituals were used to ward off spoilage, though historians debate the universality of these practices. Standing among carefully arranged sacks and barrels, you note how labor, ritual, and observation converge to ensure that tomorrow's survival is secured by today's attention. Humor persists. A small rodent attempting to sneak a morsel is met with playful frustration, reminding you that unpredictability is woven into daily routines. Field boundaries are checked before complete darkness. Fences, gates, and hedgerows are inspected for breaches, ensuring both crops and animals are secure. Fringe accounts claim that protective gestures or short rituals were performed at night to safeguard boundaries, though historians debate their significance. You walk slowly along the periphery, noting subtle signs of wildlife intrusion or structural weakness, realizing that vigilance extends beyond daylight hours, requiring both sharp observation and an almost meditative patience. Finally, you pause at a small rise overlooking the village. Fires flicker in cottages, animals settle in pens, and a quiet hum of life persists even in darkness. Fringe and mainstream practices coexist in the delicate choreography of night. Observation, ritual, humor, and labor intertwine seamlessly. Every whisper, gesture, and movement contributes to survival, community cohesion, and cultural continuity. You breathe in the cool night air, listening to distant crickets and soft rustlings in the fields, aware that the village sleeps yet remains alive, maintained by centuries of knowledge, care, and subtle ingenuity. The moon hangs high now, pale and watchful, spilling silver across the fields and cottages. You trudge along the winding paths, feeling the damp grass cling to your boots, inhaling the mingled scents of earth, manure, and lingering smoke. You probably won't survive an evening like this without developing an acute sense of patience and observation, but there's an undeniable rhythm to Edwardian nighttime life, a subtle choreography of labor, ritual, humor, and survival. Historians still argue whether nocturnal activity was primarily functional or whether it carried cultural and symbolic weight, but standing here, listening to the quiet symphony of the village, it seems inseparable. Animals occupy the forefront of your attention. Sheep settle into soft hay, pigs root contentedly in pens, and chickens huddle silently in coops, ruffling their feathers against the cool night air. You watch a shepherd glide along a fence line, lantern swaying gently, whispering directions to ensure the flock remains calm. Fringe accounts suggest that whispering or singing softly to livestock was believed to promote fertility or obedience, though historians debate how widespread this practice truly was. Regardless, the effect is tangible: calm animals, attentive caretakers, and a quiet bond formed in the shared rhythm of night. Humor punctuates even these quiet moments. A pig snorts in protest at its pen assignment, and you laugh softly at its cheeky stubbornness. Fields require continual vigilance. You crouch low beside ripening wheat and barley, running fingers over stalks to assess moisture, ripeness, and signs of pests. Fringe reports claim that whispering encouragement or tracing small symbols in soil could influence plant health, though historians debate the effectiveness of such rituals. Observing the plants, you notice the subtle shifts in leaf texture, stalk color, and soil firmness, a tactile and visual language that communicates the well-being of crops and the urgency of labor. Each observation, each touch, is an act of both practicality and cultural practice. Water management remains vital. You move along narrow ditches, adjusting small sluices, clearing debris, and ensuring that the irrigation network will support both crops and animals through the night and into the coming day. Fringe sources suggest that some farmers aligned water flow with lunar phases or employed symbolic gestures to encourage fertility, though historians debate the prevalence. Standing knee-deep in the cool, reflective water, you feel a meditative rhythm in the repetition. Observe, adjust, check, repeat. Every minor correction carries profound consequences, a reminder that survival is both laborious and exacting. Domestic tasks continue under soft lantern light. You watch women tend hearths, stirring simmering pots, and preparing ingredients for the next day. Fringe accounts claim that brief blessings over fires or tools were common, though historians debate prevalence and significance. Even small spills or miscalculations are met with gentle humor: a spilled pinch of flour, a slightly singed pot, a small chuckle shared among the household. Practicality and levity intertwine, making labor bearable while reinforcing social bonds and cultural memory. Children move quietly, yet their presence is instructive. A young girl carefully gathers herbs, emulating her mother's movements, while a boy delivers small containers of feed to animals. Fringe reports suggest that play-based mimicry was a key method of skill transmission, though historians debate whether it was structured pedagogy or informal observation. Watching them, you note that these tasks are as much about learning rhythm, patience, and community norms as they are about physical labor. Humor emerges naturally in missteps: a tipped basket, a startled hen, but it is woven into education, social cohesion, and the flow of nighttime routines. Tool maintenance is an ongoing necessity. Scythes are sharpened, spades cleaned, and wooden handles checked for cracks. Fringe accounts claim that small protective phrases or blessings were uttered over tools, though historians debate their ubiquity. You handle a spade, feeling the worn wood and cold metal, and appreciate that even seemingly mundane tasks are imbued with layers of observation, ritual, and practical intelligence. Humor slips in: a dropped hammer prompts a muted joke, but it is part of the rhythm, a gentle punctuation that keeps vigilance sustainable. Storytelling is another essential aspect of evening life. By lamplight or fireside, villagers recount tales of clever animals, mischievous neighbors, and legendary harvests. Fringe reports suggest that these stories often contain moral guidance, practical lessons, or encoded social rules, though historians debate their specificity. You listen to a tale of a mischievous goose evading capture and notice how laughter, suspense, and shared attention reinforce communal knowledge. Humor functions as both relief and pedagogy, threading enjoyment through education and observation. Lighting is minimal but deliberate. Lanterns and small fires illuminate only essential areas, conserving fuel and creating pockets of shadow that sharpen perception. Fringe sources claim that lantern placement sometimes followed symbolic patterns to ward off misfortune, though historians debate the ubiquity. You notice how elongated shadows accentuate subtle details: scattered tools, stray animals, small puddles of water, enhancing your observational skills even as the village rests. Every flicker of light carries both practical and cultural significance. Evening gatherings are intimate yet significant. Neighbors exchange updates about crop health, animal behavior, or weather changes, often accompanied by humor, teasing, and playful exaggeration. Fringe accounts suggest that these exchanges carried subtle social signals or encoded guidance, though historians debate their prevalence. You observe how laughter, advice, and observation blend seamlessly, reinforcing social cohesion while sustaining practical knowledge across the village. Crop storage is checked carefully. Grain sacks, vegetable bundles, and preserved foods are inspected for pests, spoilage, and moisture. Fringe sources claim that small symbols or rituals were sometimes used to protect food, though historians debate the universality. You watch a small mouse attempt to sneak a morsel, eliciting a gentle laugh and minor improvisation to safeguard the stores. Even in preservation, the interplay of vigilance, ingenuity, and humor persists, a hallmark of Edwardian life. Field boundaries are also monitored. Fences, hedgerows, and gates are inspected for breaches, ensuring livestock remain safe and crops protected. Fringe accounts suggest that ritualistic gestures or brief incantations might accompany boundary checks, though historians debate prevalence. You walk slowly along the periphery, noting subtle environmental cues: a disturbed patch of soil, broken twigs, the soft sound of nocturnal wildlife, demonstrating that observation is continuous, even under the quiet cover of night. Finally, you pause atop a gentle rise overlooking the village. Fires flicker in cottages, animals nestle in pens, and a quiet hum of life continues. Fringe and mainstream practices coexist in a delicate choreography. Observation, ritual, humor, and labor intertwine to sustain survival and social cohesion. Each whisper, gesture, and movement contributes to the enduring rhythm of village life. You inhale the cool night air, listening to crickets, rustling leaves, and distant livestock, aware that Edwardian countryside life thrives through vigilance, ingenuity, and a touch of human levity, even under the cover of darkness. Dawn is hesitant, spilling pale light over the rolling fields, and you trudge through the dew-slick paths, boots sinking slightly into softened earth. You probably won't survive the intensity of observation and labor demanded at the cusp of day without a renewed sense of patience, but the Edwardian countryside greets you with an almost sacred continuity. Historians still argue whether early morning routines were purely practical or whether ritual, superstition, and social expectation carried equal weight, but standing here amid stirring animals and shifting light, it feels inseparable. You pause near the pasture, watching cows rise slowly, tails flicking and oxen stretch, joints creaking under the gentle pressure of awakening. Fringe accounts suggest that farmers whispered short encouragements or songs to animals at first light, believing it encouraged productivity and calm, though historians debate whether this practice was widespread or localized. Regardless, the effect is tangible: cooperative livestock, attentive caretakers, and subtle humor as a young calf stubbornly resists guidance. You bend to touch the coarse hide of an ox, feeling its warmth and strength, and recognize the quiet bond formed through observation, repetition, and empathy. Fieldwork begins in earnest. You kneel among tender shoots, brushing soil from the roots, checking for pests, and assessing moisture content. Fringe reports claim that small gestures like tracing symbols in the soil or timing planting with lunar phases could enhance growth or deter misfortune, though historians debate their efficacy. Each action requires both skill and attention. A single overlooked patch of soil can affect the yield, while careful observation ensures crops thrive. Humor enters subtly as you notice a rabbit brazenly nibbling near the edges of a well-tended plot, prompting a quiet chuckle and a reminder that not everything submits easily to human order. Watering and irrigation follow closely. You step carefully along narrow channels, adjusting sluices and clearing debris, ensuring that both crops and livestock receive adequate moisture. Fringe accounts suggest that certain irrigation sequences were believed to enhance fertility or convey protection over fields, though historians debate prevalence. You admire the reflective surface of the water, catching early sunlight and glinting like molten silver. The labor feels meditative, a rhythm of observation, adjustment, and quiet triumph as each channel flows smoothly. Domestic chores continue in parallel. Women carry water, stoke fires, and prepare simple breakfasts with a mix of precision and care. Fringe accounts claim that whispered blessings over hearths, tools, or meals were common, though historians debate the prevalence. You watch a mother gently coax dough into shape, flour dusting the air like morning mist, and notice humor woven into the act: a spilled pinch here, a slightly uneven loaf there. Even in small errors, the human element persists, softening labor with levity and connection. Children are active participants, learning through observation, play, and minor tasks. A girl arranges bundles of herbs with meticulous care, emulating her mother, while a boy carries small containers of feed to the chickens. Fringe reports suggest that mimicry and playful participation served as essential apprenticeships, though historians debate whether this constituted structured education. Observing their movements, you see the continuity of knowledge being passed along, reinforced by subtle humor, gentle correction, and shared attention. Mistakes are learning opportunities. Laughter is both release and pedagogy. Tool maintenance is essential before the heat of the day. Scythes are sharpened, spades inspected, and handles checked for splintering or weakness. Fringe accounts claim that protective phrases or small rituals were sometimes employed to ensure durability, though historians debate their significance. You run your hand along a scythe's edge, feeling the cold metal and worn wood, appreciating the intersection of observation, practicality, and subtle ceremonial care. Humor persists even here. A dropped hammer or clattering spade prompts gentle teasing, reinforcing social cohesion while maintaining focus. Field inspections expand to crop rotation planning. You move across plots, noting soil fertility, moisture, and the subtle evidence of previous yields. Fringe reports claim that lunar cycles or numerological sequences guided some planting patterns, though historians debate their actual influence. Attention to these details reflects not only practical foresight but a sophisticated understanding of environmental rhythms, seasonal cycles, and risk mitigation. Each decision is informed by observation, experience, and the occasional humorous anecdote passed down from previous seasons. Livestock management parallels crop care. You guide animals, ensuring they receive proper feed, water, and shelter, observing each creature for signs of distress or disease. Fringe accounts suggest that subtle gestures or songs could influence behavior, though historians debate prevalence. Watching cows nuzzle feed calmly, pigs root contentedly, and sheep move in unison, you note the constant dialogue between human and animal, mediated through patience, observation, and gentle humor. Even minor disruptions, a curious goat or stray chicken, become opportunities for levity and adaptation. Harvest work resumes as sunlight strengthens. Wheat and barley are cut, bundled, and transported with attention to efficiency, quality, and care. Fringe accounts suggest that rhythmic songs or phrases might have been employed to maintain coordination, though historians debate whether they were practical mnemonics or ritualized tradition. You swing a scythe, nodding the tactile satisfaction of precise movement, the scent of fresh-cut stalks, and the faint hum of communal effort. Humor punctuates labor, stubborn stalks and minor missteps elicit shared laughter, lightening the physical load without diminishing its importance. By late morning, coordination is essential. Villagers synchronize plowing, harvesting, and transport, ensuring maximum efficiency while maintaining careful observation. Fringe reports indicate that group rhythms were often reinforced through song, chant, or playful taunting, though historians debate their formal role. Watching these interactions, you realize the balance of efficiency, culture, and humor. Each person's movements complement others, mistakes are minimized, and social bonds are strengthened through shared effort. Even small moments of play contribute to learning and observation. Children mimic adult labor, animals test boundaries, and minor mishaps, spilled water, toppled baskets, wandering hens, invite laughter. Fringe accounts suggest that humor and improvisation were integral to sustaining morale, though historians debate the intentionality. Observing the dynamics, you notice the subtle integration of joy and labor. Practical tasks are tempered with levity, mistakes become narratives, and rhythm, observation, and cultural continuity are reinforced simultaneously. By midday, the heat rises and shadows short. You pause to catch your breath, inhaling the scent of freshly turned soil, grass, and the faint tang of livestock. The village hums with activity, carts creaking, tools clinking, animals murmuring, and distant voices exchanging updates and jokes. Fringe and mainstream practices coexist seamlessly. Rituals, observation, humor, and practical labor entwine in a rhythm that has sustained Edwardian communities for generations. You exhale slowly, feeling the pulse of life in every sound, scent, and movement. Survival, continuity, and culture exist not as separate threads, but as an interwoven tapestry that extends from dawn to dusk, from field to hearth, from parent to child. The sun is already past its zenith, spilling warm light across the village, and you trudge along paths softened by recent rains, boots sinking slightly into loamy soil. You probably won't survive the sheer attentiveness demanded by the cumulative rhythm of Edwardian labor without a mix of endurance, curiosity, and humor, but standing here, you recognize the quiet mastery of centuries in motion. Historians still debate whether the intricate balance of labor, observation, and ritual was purely pragmatic or if social expectation and cultural continuity held equal sway, but the evidence is everywhere, in the fields, the animals, and the rhythm of daily life. You pause near the granary, where stacks of wheat and barley are arranged with meticulous care. Fringe reports suggest that small markings, symbols, or whispered phrases were sometimes applied to storage to ensure fertility, prevent spoilage, or guard against misfortune, though historians debate their prevalence. Even here, attention to detail blends observation, ritual, and practicality. Each sack, each sheaf, each layer of straw reflects knowledge, skill, and a deep understanding of interdependence. You notice a small mouse daringly attempting to steal a morsel, and humor bubbles quietly as a farmer gently shoos it away, muttering a light-hearted curse that blends superstition with shared amusement. Fieldwork continues. You kneel to inspect root vegetables, brushing soil from carrots and turnips, and checking for pests or moisture deficits. Fringe accounts claim that farmers sometimes aligned planting and harvesting with lunar cycles or seasonal patterns beyond purely practical concerns, though historians debate their influence. Observing the vegetables, the soil, and the movement of sunlight across the field, you realize that knowledge in the Edwardian countryside is tactile, visual, and deeply relational. Every touch, glance, and adjustment informs survival. Humor subtly punctuates the work. A stubborn carrot refuses extraction, prompting a gentle laugh at its obstinacy. Watering and irrigation require constant care. You step carefully along narrow channels, adjusting sluices and clearing debris to ensure optimal flow. Fringe sources suggest that subtle rituals, timing adjustments, or gestures were used to enhance fertility, though historians debate their prevalence. Standing knee-deep in the reflective water, you notice the way sunlight glints off ripples, creating a fleeting mosaic of gold and silver. Labor here is not only physical but meditative, a rhythmic dialogue between human and environment that relies on observation, adjustment, and patience. Domestic life hums in parallel. Women carry water, tend fires, and prepare midday meals with careful rhythm. Fringe accounts claim that whispered blessings over cooking implements or fires were common, though historians debate how universal these practices were. You watch a mother knead dough, flour dusting the air, and notice the humor in small accidents. A loaf misshapen, a spilled grain, a child's laugh at minor chaos. The domestic sphere mirrors the field. Attention, ritual, observation, and levity coexist seamlessly. Children continue learning through observation and participation. A young girl carefully tends herbs, mimicking her mother's movements, while a boy carries feed to animals. Fringe reports suggest that playful mimicry and small tasks were key methods of skill transmission, though historians debate whether this constituted structured pedagogy. Mistakes invite laughter and gentle correction, reinforcing lessons while softening the burdens of labor. Observation, rhythm, and humor are as integral to survival as physical exertion. Tool care is critical. Scythes are sharpened, spades cleaned, and wheel rims inspected for cracks or wear. Fringe accounts suggest that protective words or gestures were sometimes employed, though historians debate prevalence. You run your hand along a spade, feeling the cool metal and worn wood, appreciating the intersection of labor, observation, and ritual. Humor surfaces naturally. A dropped hammer or scythe elicits gentle teasing, reinforcing community cohesion while maintaining vigilance. Animal management demands continued attention. You guide livestock to grazing areas, distribute feed, and check for signs of stress or disease. Fringe accounts claim subtle songs, whistles, or gestures influence behavior, though historians debate their prevalence. Observing cows nuzzle hay, pigs root in soil, and chickens shuffle in coordinated chaos, you recognize the delicate negotiation between human and animal. Observation, patience, and a touch of humor ensure cooperation and mutual benefit. By afternoon, communal labor takes center stage. Villagers synchronize efforts to harvest, transport, and store crops efficiently. Fringe reports suggest that coordinated chants or playful teasing maintained rhythm and morale, though historians debate whether these were formalized practices or emergent social habits. Watching the coordinated motion, you notice how humor, observation, and skill intersect to make labor manageable, sustaining both productivity and camaraderie. Small domestic misadventures, spilled water, dropped baskets, wandering animals, invite gentle laughter, creating a rhythm that softens fatigue and strengthens social bonds. Fringe accounts claim that humor and improvisation were essential in maintaining morale during prolonged labor, though historians debate intentionality. Observing these moments, you realize that joy and levity are not distractions, but integral threads in the tapestry of survival and cultural continuity. Evening approaches, fires are stoked, meals prepared, and animals guided to pens. Fringe sources suggest that protective phrases or gestures accompanied closing rituals, though historians debate prevalence. You notice the subtle choreography. Attention, ritual, observation, and humor weave together seamlessly, reinforcing continuity and signaling a temporary pause in labor. Finally, you pause atop a gentle rise, looking over the village as shadows lengthen. Fields gleam with residual sunlight, cottages emit faint smoke, and livestock settle into pens. Fringe and mainstream practices coexist in a living rhythm of work, observation, ritual, and humor. Every gesture, whisper, and action contributes to survival, cultural memory, and social cohesion. You inhale deeply, letting the sense of soil, hay, and smoke fill your lungs, and feel the pulse of life maintained by centuries of experience, ingenuity, and gentle levity. The village, like the land itself, is resilient, adaptive, and quietly vibrant. As night deepens, the village softens into a tranquil lull. The fields shimmer faintly under moonlight, and distant fires cast a warm glow from cottages. You settle onto a gentle rise, feeling the earth beneath you, soft and yielding after a day of work. Breath slows, muscles relax. The rhythm of labor, observation, ritual, and subtle humor begins to fade into a quieter pulse, a gentle reminder that even the most demanding days have their restorative cadence. The animals are calm. Cows chew contentedly, pigs huff softly in their pens, and chickens roost in serene stillness. You notice the delicate hum of life, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional distant call of night birds. Fringe and mainstream practices merge invisibly now. The whispered blessings, careful observation, and communal care echo quietly in the patterns of survival, reinforcing continuity and connection without the overt demands of labor. Cottages glow faintly from within, hearths burning low, meals digested, tools stored. You inhale the mixed scents of earth, hay, and smoke, allowing your mind to drift over the day's intricacies. the meticulous tending of crops, the negotiation with animals, the interplay of humor and ritual that sustain both body and spirit. You feel the seamless integration of human ingenuity and natural cycles, an enduring tapestry of life that moves gently from one day to the next. Slowly, the mind softens. The laughter, the songs, the whispered observations, and the tactile engagement with soil and livestock dissolve into calm awareness. You feel the pulse of the village, the heartbeat of fields, and the quiet resilience of generations woven into every stone, stalk, and breath of wind. Your eyelids grow heavy. The day's labor, observation, and ritual fade into gentle reverie, and a soft whisper of gratitude and wonder lingers in the night air. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Drift with the rhythm of the Edwardian countryside, its fields of fealty, and the enduring dance of life, humor, and survival. Sweet dreams.